The first thing Nadia noticed about the man sitting across from her in the precinct waiting room was that he was the only person in the building who didn't look afraid. Everyone else, the woman clutching a folder of insurance documents, the teenager staring at his shoes, the officer behind the desk who kept glancing at the door, they all had that look, that low-grade hum of anxiety that Nadia had worn on her face for so long she'd stopped noticing it. But not him. He sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, jacket too expensive for this zip code, eyes moving around the room the way a chess player looks at a board, cataloging, calculating. Bored. She looked away. She had her own problems. The folder in her lap contained 37 pages of evidence that her best friend of 11 years had been systematically draining the non-profit's accounts for the past 14 months. $46,000. Nadia had found it by accident, the way she found most things. By staying late, by being the person nobody remembered was still in the building, by running a reconciliation report on a Thursday night because she had nowhere else to be. Justine had been her maid of honor, had held her hair back when she got food poisoning at a conference in Baltimore, had called Nadia's mother when Nadia was too proud to ask for help after the layoff, and for 14 months, every time Nadia had stayed late running numbers, Justine had been at dinner with Nadia's fiancé. She'd found that out by accident, too. The folder was heavier than $46,000 had any right to be. "They're not going to help you." She looked up. The man across from her wasn't looking at a board anymore. He was looking at her. His eyes were dark and very still, and there was something in them that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite amusement. It was the look of someone who had been in enough rooms to know what happened in them. "Excuse me, the police." He tilted his chin toward the desk. "Whatever's in that folder, they'll take a report. They'll file it. They will not prioritize it." Nadia hugged the folder tighter. "You don't know what's in my folder. Financial crime," he said. "Embezzlement, based on the highlighted spreadsheet peeking out the top. Under 100,000, given that you're not accompanied by a lawyer. Personal, given that you look like you haven't slept in 3 days and someone who'd hired a forensic accountant for a business matter would look angry, not gutted." The word landed like a thumb pressed on a bruise. Gutted, yes, that was the word for it. "I'm fine," she said. He didn't argue with her. He just nodded, once, the way people nod when they're being polite and don't believe you at all. Then he looked away, and a man in a suit appeared at the door and said something low, and the man across from her stood up. He was taller than she'd registered. He straightened his jacket. "For what it's worth," he said, not looking at her, "the private route is faster, and the outcome is more satisfying." Then he walked out, and the door closed, and Nadia sat there for 40 minutes before an officer took her report and told her these things took time. She drove home in the rain and sat in the parking lot of her apartment for a long time, staring at the water running down the windshield. She had $2,200 in checking. The non-profit had suspended her pending the investigation. Her investigation, her discovery, her report. Because apparently that was how these things worked. Justine had retained a lawyer within 6 hours. Marcus had texted once, something about how things had gotten complicated, and he hoped she was okay. She was not okay. She went inside and made coffee she didn't drink, and opened her laptop and ran the numbers again, because running numbers was the only thing that made her feel like the ground was still under her feet. $46,412. 14 months, an average of $3,315 per month, taken in increments small enough to slide under the standard variance threshold. Whoever had taught Justine to do that had known exactly what they were doing. Nadia stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. She thought about what the man in the waiting room had said. The private route is faster. She didn't know what that meant. She told herself she didn't want to know. She found out anyway 3 days later, when she went back to the non-profit building to collect her personal items and found a business card tucked under the windshield wiper of her car. No name, just a phone number and 2 words printed below it, Kalner Advisory. She Googled it on her phone, standing in the parking lot in the wind. The search returned almost nothing, a sparse web page, a registered LLC in Delaware. No reviews, no faces. Just a single line of text on the About page. We resolve what institutions can't. She stood there for a long time. She called the number. A woman answered on the second ring, professional and entirely neutral, and asked Nadia's name and the nature of her inquiry. Nadia said she wasn't sure how to describe the nature of her inquiry. The woman said that was fine and asked if she was available Thursday at 2 o'clock. Nadia said yes. The address was a building in the financial district that she'd walked past 100 times without registering. 13th floor. A reception area that looked like a law firm but quieter, with no art on the walls. The receptionist offered her water and she said no and then changed her mind and said yes, because her mouth had gone dry somewhere between the elevator and the chair. She waited 11 minutes. She counted. The door opened and the man from the precinct waiting room walked in. He looked the same. Jacket too expensive. Eyes moving like a chess player's. He sat across from her and opened a folder. Her folder, or a copy of it, she realized, and felt a complicated twist of violation and relief. And he looked at it for a moment and then at her. "Nadia Voss," he said. "It wasn't a question." "You had me investigated," she said. "I had your situation assessed. There's a difference." He folded his hands on the desk. He had a scar along the left knuckle, small and old. "My name is Harlan. I can recover what was taken from you. 70% up front, the remainder upon completion minus our fee. I can also ensure that the parties involved understand clearly that this is not something they should attempt again." Nadia looked at the folder on the desk, then at him. "Who are you?" "Someone who resolves things. That's not an answer." "It's the answer available to you at this stage of the conversation," he said, and there was something in his voice, not cruelty, but an absolute absence of performance. He wasn't trying to impress her, or reassure her, or sell her anything. He was just telling her how it was. She found, to her own surprise, that she trusted that more than she'd trusted almost anything in the past month. "What does ensure they understand mean?" she said. "Specifically, it means they will return what they took. It means there will be consequences for not doing so that are more immediate than the legal system provides. It does not mean anyone gets hurt." He paused. "Unless they make choices that require it. I don't want anyone hurt. Then they won't be, provided they're sensible." He said it the way someone says provided you follow the instructions on the label, like it was just a variable in an equation. Nadia looked at her hands. $2,200 in checking, suspended without pay, a report sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, waiting. "Your fee," she said. 15% of recovered funds. She did the math automatically. She'd been doing math her whole life, as a kid tallying grocery totals before her mother got to the register, as a scholarship student tracking every dollar of financial aid, as a nonprofit accountant who'd learned that the best way to catch someone stealing was to be the person who still cared about the small discrepancies. 15% of $46,000 was just under $7,000. "I don't have $7,000, she said. "I'm aware." He looked at her steadily. "Payment comes from the recovery. You pay nothing up front." She stared at him. Why? It was the wrong question, maybe. Or the right one. He seemed to consider it more seriously than she expected. "Because the people who wronged you are the kind of people I find professionally irritating," he said finally. "And because you came to the precinct alone, with a folder you clearly spent weeks building, and you still look like you're not sure you did the right thing by reporting it. You did, and you shouldn't have to eat the cost of other people's dishonesty while you wait for a system that wasn't built for people like you to get around to caring." The room was very quiet. "People like me," she said. "People who keep the books and get left with the bill." Nadia looked at the window. The financial district was grey outside, glass and steel, reflecting grey sky. Everyone down there walking fast in directions that mattered to them. She thought about Justine sitting across from her at lunch 3 months ago, laughing about something, reaching over to steal a fry off Nadia's plate. She thought about Marcus's text. Things got complicated. "Okay," she said. Harlan nodded once, pulled a single page from the folder, and slid it across the desk. "Read it fully. Ask what you don't understand, sign at the bottom." She read it fully. She had 3 questions. He answered them without hedging. She signed at the bottom. She expected him to say something. He just closed the folder and stood up, and she understood that the meeting was over. She was almost at the door when he said, "Do you have somewhere to be this week?" She turned around. Why? Because Justine's lawyer is going to start applying pressure on the non-profit to settle quietly. When that happens, they'll need to know that there is a counterweight to that pressure. You being visibly available and professionally unrattled will help. I've been suspended. I'm aware. I'm asking if you have somewhere to be. Nadia thought about her apartment, the laptop, the coffee she kept making and not drinking, the numbers she kept running, not because there was anything left to find, but because stopping felt like giving up. Not particularly, she said. There's a desk on the 4th floor, he said. It's not a job. You're not on payroll. But if you want somewhere to be while this resolves, it's there. She looked at him for a moment. He was already looking back at the folder. Okay, she said again. She didn't know why she kept saying that word. It wasn't as if things were okay. But somehow in this room, with this man who talked about consequences the way other people talked about tax brackets, the word felt less like a lie than it had in weeks. The 4th floor desk was in a room with 2 other people who didn't introduce themselves and didn't ask who she was. There was a laptop already logged in to a secure file system and a note that said case reference 1147, VOS, read-only access. She read everything. It took most of the morning. Harlan had investigators. She gathered this not from anyone telling her, but from watching the files populate over the next 2 days. Documents, financial records, a chain of transactions that mirrored her own analysis, but went 3 layers deeper, into accounts she hadn't known to look for. They were good. Whoever they were genuinely good. She found an error on day 3. Not in their work, in the underlying bank records. A routing number discrepancy that kicked a secondary transfer into a holding account rather than the one it was supposed to reach. $600, sitting in limbo. Easy to miss. The kind of thing that only showed up if you were looking at the raw data instead of the summary layer. She flagged it in the system, not sure if anyone would see it, and went back to reading. 40 minutes later, Harlan appeared in the doorway of the room. "You found the routing error," he said. "It was there. My team missed it." He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her with that same evaluating stillness. "Do you want to see the full account structure?" "Yes," she said before she'd finished thinking about it. He pulled a chair to her desk, not deferring, not performing graciousness, just making room, and pulled up a diagram on a secondary monitor. It was intricate. Multiple shells, 2 international transfers, 1 account tied to a name she didn't recognize, but Harlan clearly did, because something in his posture changed slightly when she pointed to it. "Who is Brennan?" she said. "Someone Justine owes money to," he said, which means Justine was not keeping the money. She was funneling it. Nadia stared at the screen. 14 months, $46,000. Not to fund a lifestyle, not out of greed, but out of, what, fear, debt? "She was in trouble," Nadia said slowly. "She is in trouble," Harlan said. "That's different from an excuse." "I know." And she did know. The knowing didn't stop the ache. "Can you get to Brennan?" He looked at her then, and something shifted in his expression. Not softening, more like recalibration. Like she'd moved on the board and he was updating his assessment. "Yes," he said. "Then get to Brennan," she said. "Because if Justine was being coerced, the non-profit will drop the civil case against her if there's a viable third party. I can get the ED to agree to that. I know her. She'll go for it if it means cleaner PR. Justine returns what she can. Brennan gets whatever it is you do to people like Brennan. The organization recovers the funds, and Justine doesn't lose everything for being an idiot who borrowed money from the wrong people." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "You spent 3 days feeling gutted about this woman," he said. "I can feel gutted and still do the math," Nadia said. "They're not mutually exclusive." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll have a proposal for the ED drafted by tomorrow morning." She nodded. She turned back to the screen. She didn't notice for another hour that he was still in the room, working at the secondary monitor. and that at some point someone had put a coffee on the corner of her desk, and it was still hot. The resolution took 11 days in total. Brennan, it turned out, responded very quickly to having his financial holdings made suddenly, comprehensively visible to people he'd prefer, didn't see them. The $46,000 was returned in full within 72 hours. The non-profit's executive director agreed to the restructured terms. Justine didn't go to prison and didn't keep her position and didn't come out of it anything close to clean, but she came out of it with a path forward, which Nadia had not been required to provide and had provided anyway. Marcus sent another text. She didn't respond. On the 12th day, Nadia sat in the chair across from Harlan again, and he slid an envelope across the desk, 6,800 and something, her 15% deducted from the recovery, and she took it and looked at it for a moment and thought about how 3 weeks ago she'd been sitting in a parking lot in the rain, calculating whether she could make rent. "Thank you," she said. "You did substantial work on this," he said. "The routing error alone saved us 2 days. I like finding the thing that doesn't fit, I know." He looked at her steadily. "I'm offering you a position. Research and financial analysis. You'd be working cases like this one and some that are less tidy. The pay is good. The hours are not always reasonable. The work is real." Nadia looked around the office. The plain walls, the absence of anything decorative or reassuring, the people in the halls who moved like they knew exactly what they were there for. "What does less tidy mean?" she said. "It means that some of the people whose accounts I ask you to examine are very motivated to ensure that nobody examines their accounts," he said, "and that the line between our work and the things we work against is real, but it requires judgment. Regularly. You're telling me this is dangerous. I'm telling you it's complicated. Those are different things." He paused. "You already know how to sit with complicated." She thought about the folder on her lap in the waiting room, the 37 pages. The way her hands had been perfectly steady even when her chest felt like something had been hollowed out of it. She thought about the routing number, the small discrepancy that everyone else had looked past. She thought about what he'd said that first day, people who keep the books and get left with the bill, and how it had felt like being seen in a way she'd been waiting for someone to manage for a very long time without knowing she was waiting. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He pulled a second document from the folder. "Read it fully," he said. "Ask what you don't understand. Sign at the bottom." She read it fully. She had 5 questions this time. He answered all of them. She signed at the bottom. Outside the window, the city moved the way cities do. Fast, indifferent, full of transactions happening at every level, some of them in the light, and some of them not. Nadia Voss had spent her whole life in the light, keeping careful records of what came in and what went out, watching other people make the kind of messes that she quietly cleaned up, and going home to an apartment where the math always balanced and nothing else did. She picked up her pen. She signed her name where it said to sign. The numbers, she thought, were finally adding up to something that looked like hers.